Hello and welcome back to the Beth Effect. I'm your host, Beth Clifford. I have Diet Coke with me. It's actually being recorded on Father's Day, so I want to give a shout out to all the amazing dads out there, whether on earth or in heaven, because there are some amazing ones that have also passed. So shouting out to them. I'm fueled with Diet Coke and Costco taquitos as I record this podcast, but I want to talk about, I was in a business meeting a few weeks ago with one of our clients, and they made a comment to me about, hey, do you know how hard Gen Z are to hire? They're the worst employees. They had said like they're always on vacation, they never want to work, and they're just not hard workers. And I thought when they're venting to me about this for Gen Z, and by the way, it was for someone at their front desk, which is arguably, in my opinion, one of the most important positions in a business, but it's chronically the lowest paid and has the highest turnover. So they're complaining about how Gen Z are so hard to deal with in the workplace. And I left that meeting, just let them vent to me, but I left that meeting and I was contemplating my team, and I have 3 Gen Z like reps on my team at the time. And I thought, really, that's so interesting because those 3 are really hardworking and always deliver results. So it got me kind of thinking about, all right, what are the actual statistics here when it comes to Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, and baby boomers in the workplace? And I kind of want to deep dive it with you a little bit. And so I looked up the statistics, and then I actually put them into a table so I could compare them, like the statistics. And just to clarify, because I had to figure this out, boomers are like, they're born between 1946 and 1964. So that would be like my parents' age. Gen X are, so they're like basically like they're at the very end in the workforce. So they're in the workforce, but they're close to retirement. Gen X, so that's 1965 to 1980. And then millennials are 1981 to 1996, which, by the way, I fall into that category. I'm right slap bang in the middle of the millennial sandwich. And then Gen Z, so they're born in 1997 to 2012. So just from a statistics standpoint, let me just share some of these with you. For Gen Z, the average job tenure for them is 1 to 2 years. There's a slow growing scale. Obviously, the highest tenure are baby boomers, and that's 8 to 10 years plus that they tend to stay in the job that they're in or the company that they're at. As far as workplace priorities, so if you're a Gen Z, their priorities, and again, these are statistics. This is not like everyone. These are statistics, but they care the most about their workplace priorities are career growth, flexibility, and purpose. Millennials, interestingly, say growth, but also autonomy. Like they want to kind of have autonomy in their job and be left alone. And then if you look at the extreme, the baby boomers, their workplace priorities are stability, job security, and interestingly enough, hierarchy. They like the traditional hierarchy within the workplace. Interestingly enough, some of these statistics I didn't care about, but I'm going to like deep dive this with you. So hear me out. Attitude towards PTO. So paid time off. What are, going back to the comment of they're always on vacation, they're always gone. What's the attitude there? So for Gen Z, 55% of them actually feel guilty taking PTO, and 24% of them quietly take PTO, which actually makes me laugh pretty hard because if I think of my team, my Gen Z, all of them are constantly on the go. Like they're always traveling. Any spare time they can, they're traveling, but they take their work with them. So like I've never had a problem. I have one like rep on my team last year that went to Europe. All of her bonus money went to travel. So she went to Europe 6 times, but she also was the number 1 rep in the country for the year. So she would work while she was gone. But she was gone a lot, but she also worked while she was gone, and she did feel the guilt. And that's what I knew. Maybe sometimes she was gone and I didn't know about it. Who's to say? This is really interesting. Millennials, 60% leave PTO unused because they feel guilty around taking the time off. So when they're actually on PTO, they feel guilt about being gone from their jobs. And so 60% of their PTO does not get used. That is insane to me, but also I can see it. Gen X tend to use PTO reasonably, no guilt. And then interestingly enough, our baby boomers use all their PTO and they're completely comfortable with taking time off. And I kind of want to deep dive that, and we're going to come back to that. But then flexibility preferences. So here's something that's key. Gen Z crave remote work. They're really interested in a 4-day week. Again, millennials really highly value autonomy, but then you've got the boomers that tend to prefer in office and they value routine. Like they want like a stable routine where they know and it's predictable. And then workplace loyalty, no surprise here, but Gen Z's low, will leave if needs are not met, which is probably why they move around a lot. Millennials, their workplace loyalty is purely based on culture and purpose. If they believe in the culture and purpose of an organization, they tend to stay longer. And then you look at the boomers and they'll stay with company for decades. Oftentimes they will just stay with one company their entire career, which is wild. So also, last thing, like motivational drivers. So if you're in a Gen Z, statistically, your motivational drivers are recognition, growth, and that their values are in alignment with the company, but they want a lot of recognition. For millennials, it's purpose and balance and feel like they're making an impact. For Gen X, it's stability and clear expectations. And then for baby boomers, it's job security and retirement benefits. I don't think any of those are a surprise to me. But I just kind of want to unpack this for a second, because when I initially got this data, I was like, this is great. I get it. I understand the data, but I want to know why. Why are all the generations a little bit different? Why do Gen Z think a certain way, millennials think a certain way, Gen X and baby boomers think a certain way? Like, why is it? And so as I was like contemplating it, one thing I want to think of is like, so the boomers are like my parents' generation. So I think about when they grew up with parents that survived like 2 world wars, Great Depression. So they weren't really taught to worry about work-life balance, were they? I mean, they weren't worried about feeling fulfilled at work. They were taught to work until retirement, to save, to buy homes, pay off their homes. Typically, boomers also got married younger, so they had the responsibility of a family earlier, and they were raised by parents that honestly underwent some quite serious things in their lifetime. So they were just raised and taught to approach life differently. They have no guilt taking off their PTO because they schedule it in advance. Like they're so scheduled, like they know exactly what PTO days they have. They know exactly, how many years they have to work to retirement. I bet if you asked a Gen Z person or even a millennial, how many years do you have to work till you retire? They wouldn't have any idea. Whereas boomers and Gen X tend to know because they've scheduled out. And the PTO is interesting because they do tend to schedule this out in advance. And if they're anything like my parents or my in-laws, most of their PTO is spent vacationing to the same places. So it's like, here's where we go. Here's typically we do like a week. So for example, if I look at like my mom, it's like I take a week where I go to England and visit my parents, and I take a week where I take my kids to Newport Beach, and then I take 1 week going and exploring this place. But it's like they go to the same vacations, and why they don't feel bad taking vacation, I also think part of it is that like most of their adult life, for some of them, all of their adult life, wasn't spent posting where they are and being reachable when they're gone on vacation. So they go to the same spot, but like they really are off the grid and they're unreachable in that time. And they don't feel 1 ounce bad about it because no one knows what they're doing and where they are, and they have been trained most of their adult life to be unreachable when they're on PTO, and that's totally fine with that expectation. So then you kind of look at the millennials and the Gen Z like generations. They have fast access to a lot of things. Like when a baby boomer was interviewing for a job, like how did they interview? They like had to print out a resume and go in and hand them or snail mail them to people, right? And then you think about how quickly millennials and Gen Zs can get their applications in, can check and see if someone's hiring, what their offerings are. So they are in the workforce, and their entire career to this point in the workforce has been a lot of fast accessibility to information. They aren't getting married as early. So there's not as many financial restraints. So for example, if they don't feel highly valued in their job, they don't have kids or a spouse to feed at home. So they have no problem being like, fine, well, I'm just not going to work here and go find my own thing, because there's not as much financial pressure. They're not buying homes as quickly. They're not having families as quickly. So the financial pressures to kind of like put up and shut up aren't there. They really are more incentivized to travel. And I think it's fascinating and I love it. I think it has bled into a little bit more of the millennials as well. And I actually read something recently that said that the millennial fathers are some of the best fathers of any of the generations before them. And I think, when I was young, my dad would never leave his business. He ran a business. He would never leave any business meetings or business trip to be home in time for like anything in fact, I don't even think my dad came to any of my sporting events or any of my like high school. I mean, he came to my high school graduation, but none of my milestones along the way. Whereas now it's very common to be like, oh, I have to leave. I mean, I actually just left a leadership meeting early because my son was graduating kindergarten and my fifth grader was graduating fifth grade. And I didn't feel bad doing that and I know Brad does that too in his career, but like that wasn't the norm for like my dad growing up. It was like, no, if I can't make it because I've got obligations, that I'm not coming. So, have a good time. Let me see. They also take a lot of travel because they're working while they travel. So that's where I think the work-life balance has burnt a lot of millennials and Gen Z out, because they want to travel and be on the go a lot more, but they also don't completely shut off when they go. So like they're answering their emails, they're working, they're posting. It's like they are reachable at all times, which, I mean, that's a whole other episode on its own. The other thing is that they crave the flexibility and they want to explore different places. They don't want to feel tied down to a job because they don't feel tied down to anything. And like, okay, I can see that. I can see why, if they're not feeling fulfilled or they don't see career growth or they aren't getting the recognition they want because those are their incentives, that they don't feel tied to stay. They don't feel any loyalty to a company, which is the opposite extreme when you look at Gen X and boomers, where they have invested sometimes decades of their life to a company. So they feel like they're in it, they're invested. Also, Gen Z, they're not really saving for a rainy day, and that's because they have yet to really experience a rainy day. And so you can't really blame them. And I would like lump myself in this. Like, I graduated high school in 2006. So when we had our recession, I was in college. It didn't affect me. I didn't have a business that went bankrupt. I didn't have to sell my home. And so I think of what I've lived through in my life was 9/11, where I was 14 years old and super shocked and heartbroken at it. But that was more from I was a teenager, barely really understanding the scope of what happened then. And then I was in college when a lot of businesses were struggling. So I was on financial aid in college. So it wasn't, I understand whether that mindset of like, oh, save for a rainy day. And it's like, well, why? I know why baby boomers think that. I know why they are like meticulous about putting up with a bad work environment and counting down to retirement because of what they listen to their parents experience. But Gen Z and millennials, they haven't really experienced it yet. So they're traveling not to be indulgent, but it's almost like that's what they're considering their investment is just, they're almost giving traditional life the middle finger, and they're investing their time and money in experiences. So honestly, it's just very interesting when I can't, here I have been banging on for 50 minutes about this, but like it is really interesting when we look at that in the workplace and how these different generations show up in the workplace. And I honestly think that there's like pros and cons to both, because like you look at boomers and Gen X, they are more stable, they're more loyal, they're more predictable, and they enjoy hierarchy. So if you have a business where, you know, there's a chain of command, or there is hierarchy, or you have to ask, you know, permission before you email an executive this or that, these are great employees for you to have. And then honestly, the pros of the Gen Z and millennials, like we know what the cons are for each generation, so I don't want to go into that. But like, what are the benefits for a Gen Z-ish millennial in the workforce? And I think that there's the more world experience, I think, is benefit. Like there's a lot different perspectives coming in that opens the doors for lots of different, like more creativity, more ideas. You do kind of have employees that are fine working around the clock, fast action. They're fast. They are more resourceful, more likely to work on the go. And that's what I've seen in my Gen Zs. I mean, they are, yes, they work, like they play really hard, but they work really hard, and they're very resourceful. Like if they're coming to me, it's because they've exhausted all these other options first. And I actually really love the different perspectives that they have, because they are traveling and experiencing more environments. I actually think, for me personally, that has like benefited like our work environment and our team environment. So basically, if we were to wrap this up now and look at this, now that we know kind of what the differences are and maybe why the differences are and what the benefits would be, really what it comes down to is like, is a Gen Z a bad hire for you versus a boomer for a job? And the more I've dived into it, the more I think of it just comes down to what position you're hiring for. So if you're the type of company that values stability, that you have an open position and there isn't really career growth for it, but you want someone that is dependable, that is a planner, that is going to invest the next decade of their life there, I would say probably not a good fit for a Gen Z or a millennial. This would be a great fit for a Gen X or a boomer. If you have great health and retirement benefits, then they would be a great hire for you. You want stability. If you're looking at a front desk person where it's customer service, you want someone reliable, you want someone that you can depend on, you want someone that you can train, and they don't then want to move up in the company or travel the world or decide to just go open a cafe in Italy, then yes, I think that Gen X or that boomer is a great hire there. And that's not just the front desk. There's plenty of jobs within a corporation where stability and dependability is like highly valued. But then I think, if you want someone that's a go-getter, that's going to think outside the box, that is fast action, it's more of a creative role, then you have a culture where you really do value impact, and you have a high recognition culture. You don't care or rely as much on the hierarchy. Then a Gen Z or millennial is going to be a great hire for you too, if you have flexibility. I look at my husband's company; they're all remote. And it's online, and you have to think outside the box. So honestly, startup, small businesses, your Gen Z millennials are great hires for that. So I don't think that, in conclusion, of all of this, when I kind of listened to this client of mine vent, and the takeaway is Gen Zs aren't bad hire, but for the particular job that you are hiring for, we're looking at the wrong type of profile. We're hiring the wrong people, because what that generation is looking for and what they bring to the job is just not the right fit. So it doesn't mean that one generation is better in the workforce than the other. What it means is that there tends to be statistical preferences on what each generation is looking for. And I think when you really unpack it, it's completely valid. So really the takeaway is, let's not just generalize and say, okay, millennials are needy and need a bunch of recognition and they just need a pat on the head all the time, whereas boomers just want to stay put and, will never leave you. Because there are pros and cons to both. And I actually think there's a place for every single generation in the workforce, and every single one of them brings a ton of value, which is a super exciting place to be, because if we were all the same, it would be extremely boring. So yeah, that's it for this podcast episode. Thanks for listening along. If there's a takeaway that you liked, or someone that you believe would benefit from this, or just like any aha moments, I'd love for you to comment, share, right on my Instagram. You can find me. My Instagram is @the Beth Clifford. It's actually Instagram and TikTok. TikTok is more personal behind the scenes. Instagram is more business behind the scenes. I will be back next week with a brand new episode. Thanks for listening along on the deep dive into Gen Z versus boomers in the workforce. And hopefully you found something of value this week. But thanks for chit-chatting with me. Crack open a fresh Diet Coke, which is now being labeled as the refrigerator cigarette. And I will be back next week with a new episode. Bye.